Order. We continue line-by-line scrutiny of the Crime and Policing Bill. Before we begin, I've just got a few preliminary reminders for the committee. Also, it's quite warm today, so if members wish to take their jackets off, please do. I'll probably end up taking mine off. Please switch all your electronic devices onto silent. A reminder that no food or drinks are permitted during sittings of the committee except the water that's provided. Hansard colleagues would also be very grateful if members could email their speaker notes to hansardnotes@parliament.uk or alternatively pass them to one of the Hansard colleagues in the room. Also, if members wish to speak, just a reminder to try and bob and catch my eye. We now come to the question that Clause 78 stand part of the bill, with which it will be convenient to also consider Clause 79 stand part. Minister.
Good morning, Mrs Lawbrook, and it's a pleasure to see you this morning in the chair on this glorious day. Clause 78 will provide two new criminal offences in relation to electronic devices used in vehicle-related theft. The first will criminalise the possession of such devices, and the second will criminalise the importing, making, adapting, supplying or offering to supply these devices. Both offences require a reasonable suspicion that the device will be used in connection with the theft of a vehicle, theft of anything in a vehicle, or taking a vehicle without authority. A significant proportion of vehicle theft is driven by serious and organised crime groups, which cost millions of pounds in social and economic harm each year. Given the high demand for stolen vehicles and vehicle parts, this is a very attractive and lucrative area for criminals to profit from. Criminals find ways to overcome security measures, even in the latest vehicle models, by using electronic devices to exploit vulnerabilities in vehicles and new technologies. The Metropolitan Police Service estimate that in London, electronic devices are used in approximately 60% of vehicle theft. Clause 78 does not define specific electronic devices, but uses a broad definition to cover any electronic device that could be used in vehicle theft. This ensures the legislation is future-proof for any new devices that may be developed and used by criminals in the future. The offence will be triable either way, and on conviction on indictment will carry a maximum sentence of 5 years imprisonment or an unlimited fine or both. We've also provided a defence for a person charged with this offence to show they did not intend for or suspect that the relevant article would be used in connection with theft of a vehicle or anything in a vehicle. Clause 78 also outlines that the court may assume the defendant possessed the relevant article where it was on any premises at the same time as the defendant, or on premises on which the defendant was the occupier or a habitual user, otherwise than as a member of the public. The defendant will have a defence where they can show they did not know of its presence on the premises or had no control over the article. During proceedings, a court can also assume the articles in question are intended for use in vehicle theft. This reflects the fact that there are few legitimate uses for the specified articles. Clause 79 supports Clause 78 by clarifying the evidential burdens for the new offence, whilst also inserting it into the list of lifestyle offences in the Proceeds of Crime Act 2002. This means that, if convicted of this offence, a person's assets will be considered to have potentially derived from crime and may be subject to confiscation. To have a defence, the defendant will be required to establish the facts which are within their knowledge. For instance, demonstrating they run a company that supplies legitimate electronic devices. Signal repeaters, which have been approved for use by Ofcom, are legal to own and use, for example, to boost mobile phone signal where the signal is otherwise weak. And if the defendant can demonstrate they did not intend nor reasonably suspect the articles were to be used in vehicle theft, the evidential burden falls back on the prosecution. The prosecution would need to prove beyond reasonable doubt that the defendant did have reasonable grounds to suspect the article they were importing, making, modifying, supplying, offering to supply, or possessing would be used in vehicle theft. This reverse evidential burden is appropriate given the few legitimate uses associated with specified articles. It will ensure law enforcement agencies are able to target those individuals who keep just enough distance from the serious offences being carried out to avoid consequences under existing legislation. Serious and organised crime has a devastating effect. I'm sure we can all agree on that. These clauses send a very clear message of our commitment to tackle vehicle crime and associated serious and organised criminality, as well as ensuring it is easier for the police to take action, meaning more prosecutions and criminals off our streets, helping to restore public confidence.
Opposition spokesperson, Matt Vickers.
Thank you. It is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. Clause 78 rightly introduces new offences aimed at preventing the misuse of electronic devices such as signal jammers, signal amplifiers and devices used to access vehicle wiring systems for committing vehicle-related crimes. These offences include the possession, importation, manufacturing, adaptation, supply or offer to supply such devices when there is reasonable suspicion that they will be used in connection with crimes like vehicle theft, stealing items from a vehicle or taking a vehicle without authority. Subsections provide a defence for individuals who can prove they did not intend or suspect that the device will be used for a relevant offence and allow a court to presume possession of the device if it is found on premises, occupied or habitually used by the accused, unless the accused can demonstrate they were unaware of its presence or had no control over it. Clause 79 clarifies the evidential burden in cases under Section 78 of the Crown Policing Act, which deals with electronic devices used in vehicles. It explains that where a defendant seeks to rely on a defence, e.g. that they did not intend the device to be used in a crime, they must provide enough evidence to raise the issue and the prosecution must then disprove it beyond reasonable doubt. Clauses 78 and 79 are needed to strengthen the legal response to the growing threat of tech-enabled vehicle theft, which has become increasingly sophisticated with the use of electronic devices like signal jammers and relay attack tools. Clause 78 creates targeted offences around the possession, manufacture and supply of such devices, recognising the role they play in modern vehicle crime. By focusing on intent and suspicion, the clause allows for earlier intervention and prevention, even before a theft occurs. We support these measures, but I'd like to ask the Minister what consultation was done with law enforcement, manufacturers and cyber security experts to develop the provisions, and does the Minister expect this designation to lead to more asset confiscation from organised crime groups involved in vehicle theft?
Thank you very much, Mr. Lewis. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, as always. Liberal Democrats very much welcome the measures included in Clause 78 and 79 that give police and courts more powers to reduce vehicle theft. As a constituency MP, it is disheartening to see so much car theft in our cities, particularly across London, South West London. It is a regular complaint from residents that police aren't able to do anything about it, and the police themselves are just struggling. It becomes an arms race with the technology and needing to keep up with the thefts that are becoming so much more technologically advanced. The litany of manual theft prevention measures that you have to see in vehicles now with steering locks and also wheel clamps that people have to put on. It's depressing that we are kind of going back to those old-fashioned measures because police cannot keep up with the technology that thieves employ. So very much supporting this measure to give the police the tools they need to crack down on this incredibly distressing form of theft.
Thank you, Mrs. Llewellyn, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairship today. Signal jammers and other electronic devices are a real problem, and one that many of my residents didn't realise exist until they were hit by it. I'll never forget one Saturday morning knocking on the door, the resident opening the door, saying, "Where's my car gone?" And she said I'd locked it, it's definitely should be here, and it turned out again that her car was stolen through using this technique. The inconvenience can only be is significant, and the consequences are not only the immediate inconvenience, but having to rearrange plans that you had, no longer having your cars, and also the longer term issues such as your insurance premiums increasing because of the theft. So the once seen super convenient use of keyless cars for many is now seen as a significant security flaw. I'll never forget watching my neighbour's car being stolen a few years ago using this exact method. I was watching it on CCTV after the event, and the individual walked up to the car, and from them walking to the car, gaining entry and driving off, it took 45 seconds. So, Essex Police have estimated that, well, not estimated, they've said that stolen vehicles intelligence unit recovered £13.5 million worth of stolen vehicles and parts in 2024. So this is a real issue. So I welcome clauses 78 and 79 and the tough new penalties for those who consider this crime that is so disruptive to the lives of people to be appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to speak under your chairship. I want to speak in favour of Clause 78, which tackles the growing scourge of criminals using high-tech devices to steal from hard-working people, because I know how important this is in my community. For 14 years, crime in my patch between 2014 and 2014 doubled, and these thieves no longer need just a crowbar. They use laptops, signal boosters and hacking tools to rob families of their vehicles, their livelihoods and their sense of safety, and enough is enough. Clause 78 strikes directly at these parasites. It makes it an offence not just to steal but to possess, import, manufacture or supply the very devices that make these thefts possible. It cuts off the tools of their horrific trade. I recently heard from a Hemel resident who back in December 2023 had his truck broken into and all his work tools stolen. And then in November 2024, his family's disability car was also stolen. Then, 2 of their neighbours' cars were stolen along with hundreds of pounds worth of equipment parked in a lay-by side by side by their homes. This clause sends a message. If you are gearing up to commit a crime, this country will come down on you like a ton of bricks. And let's be clear, this is not about targeting legitimate businesses or technology users. This is about targeting criminals, gangs, the shadow economy that thrives on stealing from working people and laughing as they do it. Subsection 3 rightly offers a defence for those acting innocently, but it removes the cloak of plausible deniability that too many criminals have hidden behind for too long. Chair, the people of Hemel Hempstead are fed up. They are tired of waking up to find their cars stolen. They are tired of seeing criminals treated as an inevitable part of life. They're tired of seeing their vans broken into and their tools stolen. They expect and demand that we act, and act we must. Standing up for the delivery driver who loses their van, for the care worker who needs to get her car to get to her patients, for every family who fears that they will become a victim of crime. It is not enough to simply chase stolen vehicles after they're gone. We must prevent these thefts from happening in the first place. We must choke off the supply of tools that fuel this criminality. We must make it clear that there is no easy pickings for those who prey on working people. Now, I'm proud that this bill doesn't stop with vehicle crime. It invests in neighbourhood policing, strengthens the fight against organised crime, and clamps down on new forms of digital exploitation. It rebuilds the idea that security, real everyday security, is a right, not a privilege. And this bill is a line in the sand. It says to criminals, your time is up. It says to our communities, we hear you and we are on your side. For Hemel Hempstead, for our towns and cities, for the millions of honest people who deserve better, I urge honourable members of this House to back Clause 78 and the Crime and Policing Bill without hesitation.
Yeah. Minister. Well, can I welcome the support for these 2 new clauses? And I think as constituency MPs, we all know the devastation that the theft of a motor vehicle and contents within it can cause to our constituents. In relation specifically to the questions posed by the honourable member who speaks for the Conservative Party, vehicle crime, as the honourable member may recall, was raised in the previous government's serious organised crime consultation. After this, conversations with law enforcement, vehicle manufacturers and others and Ofcom have confirmed that this is a key issue. I also just wanted to say I know from personally speaking to car manufacturers that they welcome this legislation. We are also working closely with the National Police Chiefs Council lead for vehicle crime to prevent and reduce vehicle crime nationally through a national vehicle crime working group. and the recently established industry-funded National Vehicle Crime Reduction Partnership. And through the National Vehicle Crime Working Group, and in conjunction with the Home Office, the Vehicle Crime Action Plan was formed, which includes commitments to work with motor industry representatives to consider crime prevention measures that can be taken to prevent thefts. And the other issue that the Honourable Gentleman asked me was about what the effect of these clauses would have on offending. So as I indicated, designating the new offence as a lifestyle offence under POCA will support the increased confiscation of the proceeds of vehicle crime, which again I think chimes very well with this sending a clear message to criminals that enough is enough and we are going to come after you. And with that I commend the clauses.
The question is that clause 78 stand part of the bill. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. Clause 79 has just been debated. The question is that clause 79 stand part of the bill. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. We now come to the question that clause 80 stand part of the bill, with which it will be convenient to also consider clauses 81 and 82 stand part, Schedule 10, and clauses 83 and 85 stand part. Minister.
Thank you, Mrs. Lilbrook. So this is in relation to SIM farms, this group of clauses. Criminals, we know, abuse telecommunications networks, including the use of text and calls, to target people and defraud victims at significant scale. We all most likely know of a friend or a family member or a constituent who has received such a text or have even received one ourselves, and I certainly have. These scams prey on the public, particularly those who are vulnerable. They can have a devastating emotional impact and can inflict serious financial harm on victims. Scam texts are frequently traced back to SIM farms, electronic devices which can hold sometimes hundreds of physical SIM cards that can then be used to send out thousands of scam texts and calls in seconds. They are currently legal for anyone to buy and very easy to find suppliers online, making it easy to commit telecoms fraud on a very large scale. Therefore, clauses 80 and 81 provide for new offences criminalising the possession of SIM farms without good reason or their supply without undertaking adequate due diligence. Clauses 83 to 85 will also allow the potential extension of the ban to further technologies that may be exploited by criminals to scam the UK public, with any such extension subject to a high level of scrutiny and checks. These new offences will make it difficult for criminals to access and use these devices for the purpose of fraud. They will give police the necessary tools to disrupt fraudsters even before they start using SIM farms to commit fraud. Clause 80 bans the possession of a SIM farm without good reason. A person can possess a SIM farm if they can prove that they have a good reason or lawful authority to do so. Now, the government has identified several legitimate uses of SIM farms, such as multi-SIM devices used in broadcast and programme making to facilitate the production and delivery of live and pre-recorded broadcasts. SIM farms are also used by transport providers to offer Wi-Fi on trains. I'm sure most honourable members who have to travel frequently will welcome there is that availability. Also, not only on trains, but trams, buses, coaches or ferries, as the devices switch between mobile network operators, depending on which network has best reception, where the device is located at that particular moment. And we've worked closely with stakeholders to develop a defence that would allow such legitimate use to continue uninterrupted while stopping criminals from using SIM farms for criminal activities. The clause provides examples of what may be a good reason to possess a SIM farm, including the provision of broadcast services, the operation or maintenance of a public transport service, and the operation of or maintenance of an electronic communications network. The list of good reasons in subsection 3 of the clause is not an exhaustive one, and it would be open to a person under investigation for or charged with the offence to argue that they have another good reason for possessing a SIM farm. To supply a SIM farm, suppliers will need to demonstrate they do so in the course of business, or that they had good reason or lawful authority to possess the SIM farm in the first place. Suppliers will also have to undertake reasonable customer checks to ensure the customers they are supplying with the SIM farm have the right to possess one. They will also have to show that they've made a record of these checks. Both the offences created by clauses 80 and 81 will be summary offences, subject to a maximum penalty of an unlimited fine in England and Wales, or a fine not exceeding level 5 on the standard scale, currently £5,000, in Scotland and Northern Ireland. Clause 82 provides for the definition of SIM farms for the purposes of the offence in clauses 80 and 81. This definition captures devices that contain or incorporate 5 or more physical removable SIM cards for the purpose of making calls and sending or receiving text. It seeks to avoid capturing any data-only devices that are not capable of making calls or sending texts. Now, we know the pace of technological change is rapid, and fraudsters are quick to adapt their methods to take advantage of emerging capabilities. Clause 82 therefore includes a regulation-making power which will enable the Secretary of State to amend the definition of SIM farms if future SIM farms or equivalent devices fall outside this definition, thus ensuring criminals do not take advantage of emerging capabilities. Building on this, it is important to ensure that the ban on SIM farms is not circumvented by the development of new technologies, and that we have the power to rapidly prohibit other types of technology used to facilitate fraud where these are identified in the future. Therefore, clauses 83 and 84 make it an offence to possess or supply a specified article that uses electronic communication networks or services to perpetrate fraud. Clause 85 then confers on the Secretary of State a regulation-making power to specify the articles for the purposes of clauses 83 and 84. The Secretary of State will be required to consult before laying regulations, and any regulations will be subject to the affirmative procedure. Finally, Schedule 10 to the bill provides the police a power of entry to search for SIM farms and specified articles used in connection with the new offences created by clauses 80, 81, 83 and 84. I must stress that Schedule 10 does not introduce novel or unprecedented police powers. It replicates powers already in the Police and Criminal Evidence Act 1984 in England and Wales, and equivalent powers elsewhere, and applies them to these new offences. And I commend these clauses to the committee.
Thank you. SIM farm is a system used to manage and operate a large number of SIM cards simultaneously, often using multiple mobile devices or modems controlled by central software. These farms can contain hundreds or even thousands of SIM cards, and they're typically used to send or receive a high volume of messages, calls or mobile data across networks. While there can be legitimate uses for SIM farms, such as in telecoms, testing or large-scale communication platforms, they're commonly associated with illicit and fraudulent activities. One of the most concerning uses of SIM farms is in the spread of spam and phishing texts, where mass messages are sent to unsuspecting individuals with links to scams or malware. They're also frequently used to bypass verification systems by creating large numbers of fake accounts on social media, messaging apps or online services. In other cases, SIM farms are employed in SIM box fraud, a scheme in which international calls are rerouted and disguised as local calls, depriving telecom providers and governments of revenue and making the original caller harder to trace. According to research carried out by Ofcom in August 2022, the scale of nuisance and potentially fraudulent communications across UK mobile networks remains alarmingly high. An overwhelming 75% of mobile users reported receiving suspicious texts or calls in just a 3-month period, highlighting the widespread nature of this issue. These figures demonstrate the persistent and pervasive threat posed by scam communications, underlining the urgent need for more robust protections and enforcement mechanisms to safeguard the public. SIM farms pose serious risks to national security and digital infrastructure. Their use can lead to network congestion, overwhelming mobile networks and disrupting legitimate communications. More critically, they're often exploited by organised crime networks to coordinate illegal activity, as SIM cards are cheap, disposable and difficult to trace. This makes it significantly harder for law enforcement to monitor communications or link messages to specific individuals. The previous Conservative government committed to banning SIM farms as part of its fraud strategy, announced in May 2023, and subsequently launched a consultation on how best to implement the ban. Although interestingly only receiving 50 responses, many from individuals or businesses identified as legitimate SIM farm users and opposing a ban. Mobile UK, the trade body representing the UK's 4 major mobile network operators, responded to the 2023 Home Office consultation on SIM farms, raising concerns that the proposed ban will risk being ineffective due to evolving fraud tactics and technological advancements, including the fact that single SIM devices, rather than SIM farms, are now the most common tools used to send spam SMS messages, according to data from one mobile operator. Mobile UK further warned that the proposed measures would not eliminate large-scale spam or scam messaging, and urged the government to broaden the definition of SIM farms to include software-based or eSIM-enabled methods used to achieve the same fraudulent outcomes. As part of the Criminal Justice Bill 23 to 24, the government introduced provisions to criminalise the possession or supply of devices capable of holding 5 or more SIM cards, targeting the infrastructure used in large-scale scams. In the proposals in this bill, I welcome the government carrying forward those provisions included in the Criminal Justice Bill to amend the definitions of SIM farms and prohibit other electronic devices used to commit fraud via secondary legislation. Clause 80 introduces a new criminal offence of possessing a SIM farm, reflecting growing concerns about their misuse in fraudulent and criminal activity. Under this provision, it becomes an offence for an individual to possess such a system unless they can demonstrate they have a lawful authority or good reason for doing so. This shifts the burden to the defendant to prove the legitimacy of their possession, aiming to deter misuse while protecting legitimate operations. Clause 80 also provides examples of what may constitute a good reason, including the use of SIM farms for broadcasting services, public transport operations, communications networks, maintenance or freight tracking. These carve-outs are designed to safeguard industries with genuine operational needs for such technology, while still targeting the widespread abuse seen in mass messaging scams, SIM box fraud and the illegitimate telecommunications activity. This clause is a key part of a broader effort to close regulatory gaps and strengthen the legal tools available to tackle modern digital fraud. Clause 81 makes it a criminal offence to supply a SIM farm to another person. Clause 82 offers a meaningful definition of what constitutes a SIM farm for the purposes of clauses 80 and 81 and provides power for the Secretary of State to amend the definition by regulation. Additionally, Schedule 10 provides for powers of entry and other investigatory powers relating to offences involving SIM cards. Clauses 83 to 85 create an offence of possessing a specified article, criminalises the supply of such articles with appropriate exemption, sets out the sanctions and allows for the Secretary of State to amend the definition of a specific article via amendment to keep legislation in line with technology and changing criminal behaviours. I'd like to ask the Minister whether there would be a formal review mechanism to assess the effectiveness and proportionality of these offences, particularly regarding how many prosecutions arise under clauses 80 to 85, and given Mobile UK's concerns that fraudsters are increasingly using single SIM devices, eSIMs and apps like WhatsApp to bypass traditional SMS channels, is the Minister confident that the measures in this legislation and the government's current definition of SIM farms are sufficiently future-proof to tackle emerging forms of fraud?
Joe Robertson.
Thank you, Chair. It's a pleasure to serve on this committee under your chairship. I rise in support of these clauses outlawing the use of SIM farms or the outlawing the supply of a SIM farm to another person. I just wonder whether the Minister can assist us. So it's a defence for a person to show that they have good reason to use a SIM farm. and there are examples here providing broadcasting services, operating or maintaining a public transport service, tracking freight, etc. I wonder if the Minister could just help with understanding this provision. I'm not suggesting to insert amendments, but can assist with understanding the examples of legitimate use in broadcasting services, or indeed tracking freight, because obviously it's a sort of area of legitimate, I guess, commercial activity that lay people are not particularly familiar with. So I'd be interested to know why a company would want to use multiple SIMs and phone numbers to track freight, for example. Not a complex question, not meant to be.
Minister.
Thank you, Mrs. Lilbrook. Just on the question, I'm glad that there is cross-party support for this, and of course these clauses on the whole were introduced in the criminal justice bill that the previous government brought forward. I think it's clear that fighting fraud is a top priority for this government, and tackling it is really important not only in terms of the Safer Streets mission, but the government's growth agenda and our mission, as I say, around safer streets. And we want to address the full range of fraud threats that occur. We want to close the systemic enablers that those criminals are able to exploit, such as we're discussing here, the use of SIM farms to operate at scale and without detection. And the honourable member who speaks for the Conservative Party is right that this was included in that previous bill, but we have updated the definition of SIM farms within the clauses in front of us today to reflect the newly emerging use cases. Responding to feedback from stakeholders, we are creating an additional offence for the possession and supply of additional technologies to be specified in the future with appropriate exceptions to avoid the unnecessary restrictions on legitimate businesses and professionals. So I hope that goes some way to reassure the honourable gentleman about the reason why we are trying to future-proof these clauses. And also the issue about review. This will be reviewed, these provisions will be reviewed 2 years after commencement. And on the point around legitimate activity, obviously the list, as I said, that I read out that's on the face of the bill is not exhaustive. That is to give some indication of the legitimate reasons why a business maybe, or an organisation maybe, might have in its possession these SIM farms. I think it's obviously going to be a matter for the court to decide if that legitimate reason is one that is reasonable and stands up to scrutiny. And I think the reason why we haven't got an exhaustive list is to give that flexibility, because we also know, as I said in my opening remarks, that this area is changing rapidly, and there may be new provisions in place in the coming weeks, months, years, which businesses legitimately use and have to have SIM farms to assist them in providing whatever service it is, or selling whatever it is. So I think that the way these clauses are constructed excuse me, is to allow that flexibility, and on that basis I hope that the committee will agree, and I beg to move these clauses.
The question is that clause 80 stand part of the bill. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. Clauses 81 and 82 have just been debated. With the leave of the committee, I will put a single question on those clauses. The question is that clauses 81 and 82 stand part of the bill. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. Schedule 10 has just been debated. The question is that Schedule 10 be the 10th schedule to the bill. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. If the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. Clauses 83 to 85 have also just been debated. With the leave of the committee, I'll put a single question on those clauses. The question is that clauses 83 to 85 stand part of the bill. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. If the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. We now come to Amendment 51, proposed to Clause 86, with which it will be convenient to also consider Clause 86, stand part of the bill. Clauses 87, 88 and 91 stand part, and new clauses 34 and 53. I call Jack Rankin to move Amendment 51.
Thank you, Mrs Lulbrook. If I may, I'm going to talk to Clause 86 and my amendment together. Is that appropriate? Thank you. Clause 86 will criminalise the act of wearing or otherwise using an item as a face covering that conceals their or another person's identity when in an area that the police have designated. The designation can only be made in relation to an area when the police reasonably believe that a protest may or is taking place in that area, the protest is likely to involve or has involved the commission of offences, and that a designation would prevent or control the commission of offences. The offence will carry a maximum penalty of 1 month imprisonment, a £1,000 fine, or both. Current legislation gives police the power to direct people to remove their face coverings in designated areas, as well as having the power to seize face coverings where they reasonably believe people are wearing them wholly or mainly for the purposes of concealing their identity. However, individuals can currently follow the direction of an officer to remove their face covering, but then move to a new area and put the face covering back on. With growing frequency, we have seen protesters using a face covering to conceal their identity, clearly with the aim of avoiding conviction for criminal activity in a designated area. Whether I or any individual honourable member agrees with each protest is besides the point. The right to protest has long since been at the very heart of British democracy, but there are legitimate ways to protest and there are illegitimate ways to protest. In particular, since the onset of large-scale pro-Palestinian demonstrations, the Metropolitan Police have made hundreds of arrests in connection with these protests. These arrests encompass a range of offences, including breaches of Public Order Act conditions, public nuisance, assault on emergency workers, and support for prescribed organisations. Notably, during a protest on January 18, 2025, over 70 individuals were arrested after attempting to breach agreed-upon protest conditions. The Metropolitan Police described this as, and I quote, the highest number of arrests we have seen in response to the most significant escalation in criminality. The cost of policing these protests is reaching enormous levels, with the Standard reporting in May last year that costs in London had reached over £40 million, an average of £6 million a month between October 23 and March 24. Eye-watering sums of money which I'm sure most people and most members of this House would prefer the police was using to crack down on shoplifting, mobile phone theft and violent crime. The police put themselves in harm's way to protect our precious right to protest and keep protesters safe as far as possible. The farmers' protests recently were an excellent example of public protest. As of April 25, there have been no publicly reported arrests by the Metropolitan Police in connection with the farmers' protests against proposed inheritance tax reforms. These demonstrations, which commenced in November 24, have been largely peaceful and coordinated with authorities. For instance, on the 1st of March 25, the Metropolitan Police imposed conditions under the Public Order Act to prevent tractors from entering central London during the protest, a measure that was communicated in advance and adhered to by the organisers. However, it is a sad reality that disruptive examples such as climate-active protests, anti-Semitic hate marches and far-right riots are increasingly accompanied by crime. And increasingly, cowards at these protests use face coverings and balaclavas to get away with these crimes. Balaclavas intimidate the public, make law enforcement more difficult, and embolden the wearer to commit crime. In my view, face coverings have no place at protests in the overwhelming majority of cases. I strongly believe that those wishing to express a sincere, genuine view in a democracy, and one they clearly feel strongly about, should be prepared to put their face to their opinions. With crowds of the kinds we are now used to seeing, particularly in London, the police increasingly have to rely on delivering justice after the fact, using CCTV, iPhone or body cam footage. Face coverings frustrate this process. A balaclava, a COVID mask or any other type of face covering should not be enabling people to have a free pass to commit crime. And that's why I have tabled Amendment 51 that would require those wishing to wear a face covering within a designated protest area to register with police before the event. Because those who wish to cause a problem will cover their face and make spurious claims, which is my concern with Clause 86 as it is currently drafted. A As it's currently written with a defence of health, religious or work grounds being able to be used, it is clear to most people, I think, with some common sense, that this will not have sufficient teeth, I would suggest to the Minister. The amendment in my name aims to shift the emphasis and prevent malicious actors from circumnavigating the well-intended clause 86. The 2024 YouGov poll showed that 61% of the public would like to see a ban on face coverings when there is a clear intent to intimidate or prevent police from identifying someone committing a crime. The public know that face coverings at protests are simply the tool of criminals. Let's give the police the real powers they need to tackle the issue. If people have genuine health, religious or work grounds for wearing a face covering, then working with the police and giving written notice will not be an issue for the law-abiding majority.
Just on that point.
Certainly.
I thank the Honourable Member for giving way. Can I ask him to give some example of how this would be enacted? Would the person who has permission to wear a face covering be given notice by the police? Would they be given a permission slip that they would then wave above their head if they are taking part in a march? Does he imagine this is a tabard that they wear that allows them to cover their face? Can he give some examples of how this would be, how he imagines this would be implemented in practical terms?
Yeah, certainly. I thank the honourable member for his constructive question. So what if I ask a slightly wider question, but I will come to the nub of that. So I think we need to, the problem with this is that it will be obviously abused. People who are malicious about this will claim these things after the fact. I'm trying to ever so slightly shift the emphasis in my amendment. I appreciate there will be difficulties around enforcement, but I think the point should be is that you have to do this in advance. People who are malicious in doing so won't do so, or at least won't be given permission, and so the police can then take action, as opposed to a crime happening and then going to the CCTV footage at the moment and then nothing being able to be done. A question I did have for the Minister, if I am certainly.
Thank you, Chair, and I'm grateful to the Honourable Member for giving way, and I'm listening carefully to what he said, and I agree with much of what he started with. Just in respect of his answer to the Honourable Member, and also just looking at new clause, Amendment 51, pardon me, I'm curious how he thinks it will work in practice, because, as he said, giving advance written notice, what practicalities do the police have in place in order to be able to, operationally and resource-wise, deal with that? Do they have the capability to do so? Similarly, with the subclause 4, delivering it notice orally, again, how feasibly would the police do that in the midst of a protest when they are dealing with managing the protest and ensuring that it is safe and secure?
So I do appreciate that there are operational challenges to this. I would suggest that it would be automated quite simply online. My aim in this is to stop whole groups of protesters wearing these masks. My view is that police, if they're not legitimate, should reject these, and at which point they can treat this collectively as an offence. I do have a question for the Minister more generally, if I may. In racking my mind in considering this issue more broadly, I was trying to think of when I would consider a face mask at a protest to be legitimate, and the only instance that I could think of, I'm not saying there aren't more, but the only instance I could think of was, for example, those who perhaps protesting what's happening at Hong Kong, who wish to protect themselves from being targeted by the Chinese state, for example, outside the Chinese embassy. And these individuals, for example, under my amendment, should be able to declare those with relevant police forces ahead of the event. But I do wonder more generally how we give proper protection to Hong Kong activists like Tony Chung and the former politician Carmen Lau, who have both had threatening letters sent to their neighbours offering 1 million Hong Kong dollars, which is about 100 grand in our money, for information about them or deliver them to the Chinese embassy. I think, as I say, that the legitimate process, is in the great spirit of democracy, and we need to ensure that we defend people exercising that right properly. In this instance, which would be, in my view, a legitimate use of face coverings. Thank you very much.
Amendment 51 proposed to clause 86 as on the amendment paper. The question is that the amendment be made. Luke Taylor.
Thank you, Ms Law. I would raise concerns, as made in my intervention, about the practicalities of the amendment. you did come on later, the Honourable Member did come on later to discuss the potential implications, particularly on Hong Kong protesters. Obviously, we have seen an increase in surveillance by the Chinese state and the Hong Kong authorities on overseas protesters. Transnational repression on democracy activists is an increased worry for many of our residents. I worry that this amendment makes that freedom to protest without the worry that you will be identified and your family and friends targeted elsewhere. And I use the example of Hong Kong, and it is not only Hong Kong who are practicing this sort of transnational repression in our country, but it's a useful one to base the objection around. Residents who would want to come to a protest to exercise their democratic right would require to register in advance and again have some sort of certificate or permit that then would need to be checked one by one. I think that this puts a particularly unworkable additional step again in front of exercising our democratic right. So on that basis I would like to note my objection to it and would invite the member to withdraw it.
Matt Vickers.
Thank you. We're all too familiar with those who use protests and the anonymity of face coverings to commit criminal acts and intimidate others. When individuals conceal their identity, whether through masks, scarves or other objects, it becomes much harder for police to identify suspects involved in criminal activity, such as violence, vandalism or intimidation. This anonymity can embolden a small number of individuals to commit offences with the belief they won't be held accountable. In 2024, masked individuals reported to have attacked police officers in Rotherham during protests, leading to discussions about banning face coverings at such events. Members might recall in Birmingham, a group of men wearing balaclavas and waving Palestinian flags stormed a pub, assaulted a patron and caused property damage. This incident was part of a series of unrest across the UK, prompting investigations by law enforcement. My honourable friend ably sets out the purposes and benefits of Amendment 51. Seeking to provide a framework requiring those concealing their identity to provide advance notice. We heard during evidence of the legitimate reasons people may wish to conceal their identity. And we're also very aware of the need to protect the public from those who exploit such concealment to do harm to others. This could provide a great opportunity for law enforcement to properly assess and monitor situations, offering a more flexible and accountable approach to managing exemptions. I'd be interested to hear the Minister's views on this and whether she feels there could be benefits in looking at ways in which enforcement might be able to have more flexibility and power in assessing the use of face coverings. Clause 86 rightly introduces a new offence aimed at individuals concealing their identity while attending public protests in designated areas. It recognises and provides for certain legitimate reasons a person might have for covering their face, including those related to health, religious observance or occupation. It also rightly sets out obligations on the authorities to ensure public awareness of the rule when it's in effect, as well as the sanctions for those who fail to comply. This clause signals a clear message that protests should be lawful, peaceful and safe. When used appropriately and with the public properly informed, this measure could greatly enhance the safety of both demonstrators and the wider public by discouraging those who intend to use anonymity as a cover for criminal acts. Clause 87 sets out the powers available to senior police officers to designate a specific locality in England or Wales where the offence of concealing identity at protests will apply. It allows for this designation to be made for up to 24 hours, and if it is reasonably believed that a protest is happening or is likely to happen in the area, that it may involve criminal activity, and that it's necessary to limit or prevent such offences. This clause further sets out how the designation can be expanded and the ability for British Transport Police and MOD Police to apply similar designations within their jurisdictions. Clause 88 sets out the requirements and procedures around creating such designations. I'd be grateful if the Minister could set out what safeguards are in place to ensure that designation power is not applied disproportionately or used to deter legitimate protests. How will the police ensure that adequate and timely public notice is given to protesters or members of the public who may enter a designated area unknowingly? And could the Minister clarify how long written records of designations and directions would be retained and whether these will be publicly accessible for scrutiny and accountability? Will there be a requirement for post-event review of designations and use of these powers to assess their proportionality and impact? And with regards to new clause 34, the proposed amendment aims to provide a clear and precise definition of what constitutes serious disruption to the life of the community in the context of public processions and assemblies under the Public Order Act 1986. It seeks to address the impact of public gatherings on day-to-day activities, essential services and the delivery of critical goods, providing a more robust framework for assessing the level of disruption caused. The amendment introduces an expanded definition of what constitutes serious disruption. It specifies that public processions or assemblies could cause serious disruption if they obstruct day-to-day activities, such as making journeys, delaying the delivery of time-sensitive products, or blocking access to essential goods and services like healthcare, food, water and transport. This makes it clear that any event disrupting the basic functioning of society can be subject to this regulation. By focusing on disruptions that are more than minor, the amendment ensures that the threshold for intervention is not too low, preserving the right to protest while protecting vital services. The amendment further requires authorities to consider the combined effects of multiple public events happening in the same area. This could involve, for example, multiple protests or assemblies that might overlap in time or space, creating a larger disruption than any single event alone. By considering cumulative disruption, the amendment gives authorities greater discretion and foresight in managing public order, ensuring that overlapping events are appropriately regulated to minimise the community impact. One of the key reasons for this amendment is to address concerns raised by the Zeidler judgment, which many would argue have limited the ability of authorities to regulate public gatherings effectively. The judgment may have hindered efforts to impose conditions on public events that were causing significant disruption. This amendment clarifies the legal framework and provides stronger grounds for intervention, particularly when events cause disruption to essential services or public safety. By doing so, it helps ensure that law enforcement can act decisively to maintain public order while respecting individuals' rights to protest. The amendment provides better protection of public interests by ensuring that essential services and normal functioning of society are not unduly disrupted by public gatherings. This amendment also offers a clearer and more predictable legal framework. It reduces ambiguity for both law enforcement and protest organisers, ensuring everyone knows the boundaries of acceptable behaviour during public events.
Minister.
Thank you, Mrs. Lilbrook. Clause 86 introduces a new criminal offence for a person wearing or otherwise using an item that conceals their identity or another's identity in a public place that has been designated by the police. It is a defence for a person to prove that they wore or used the item for a purpose related to the health of the person or others, religious observance or relating to the person's work. Clause 87 provides that a constable whose rank is at least that of inspector may designate a locality in England or Wales that is in their police area for a specified period not exceeding 24 hours. The constable must reasonably believe that a protest may take place or is taking place in the locality, that the protest is likely to involve or has involved the commission of offences, and it is expedient in order to prevent or limit the commission of offences to designate the locality. And I want to deal with the comments from the Honourable Member for Windsor and also the Honourable Member for Sutton and Cheam, who raised this example, and we heard evidence right at the beginning of this committee around protesters perhaps from the Hong Kong community protesting against the Chinese authorities, and how this would affect them, legitimately wanting to cover their faces because of some of the reprisals and repercussions that might be threatened to their family back in Hong Kong. So I just want to be really clear that this measure does not create an offence of concealing your identity at every protest. So the offence only applies to a protest, as I've just said, in a locality designated by the police. And they can only designate a locality where they reasonably believe that the protest is likely to involve or has involved the commission of offences, and that it is expedient to do so in order to prevent or limit the commission of offences. So the majority of protests are peaceful and would not be captured by these particular clauses. And also, I want to say that the use of these powers and the management of protests is an operational decision for the police, and we would expect them to consider the nature of the protest, including those who are likely to be present, before deciding to designate an area using this power. So I hope that sets out clearly and deals with the particular point that was raised about protesters from the Hong Kong community and, of course, others. Now, as I've just been setting out, the constable at the rank of inspector who designates a locality must ensure that all reasonable steps are taken to notify the public of the designation, including offences created under Section 86, the locality and the period that it will be enforced. Clause 88 sets out the procedure for designation, including what they must specify. Clause 91 is the interpretation section for Part 9. Now, in recent years, as has already been said by a number of honourable members, the police have faced significant challenges when it comes to the policing of large-scale protests. Whilst the majority of those attending these protests are exercising their rights peacefully and within the confines of the law, unfortunately we have seen a minority of individuals behave in a criminal manner whilst hiding their identity. And it is vital that the police are able to identify those who commit criminal offences during the course of these protests. Firstly, for the clear reason that those who commit criminal offences should face justice for their crimes. And secondly, because preventing criminality at protests ensures that peaceful protesters and the wider community are protected from harm. Yes, I'm happy to.
Sorry, just to point out that the Shadow Minister in his remarks spoke about an incident that actually happened in my constituency, just to assure everybody, the people who committed those criminal offences, which were not really part of any protest, were held accountable and sent to prison.
Well, it's always good to hear when people are held accountable for their actions, when they're criminal actions, and punished accordingly. So I'm very pleased to hear that. Now, I just want to go back to this issue of fully explaining how this particular clause is going to work. So at the moment, the police do have existing powers to require individuals to remove disguises in designated localities where criminality is likely. And these powers have not always worked in the way that I think we all want them to, with individuals complying with directions to remove disguises, but then later putting them back on. And in a large protest, it is difficult to prevent this from occurring. That's why the new offence makes it a criminal offence to conceal your identity as soon as the locality has been designated. And I want to make it clear that the police have to take all reasonable steps to notify the public that a designation has been made, the nature of the offence, the locality to which the designation applies, and the period during which the designation will be enforced. A designation must be in writing, except for where this is not reasonably practical, for example in a live and rapidly moving public order situation, in which case the police can make an oral designation instead and record this in writing as soon as reasonably practicable. Now, the maximum penalty for this offence is 1 month's imprisonment or a level 3 fine not exceeding £1,000. So, turning to the amendments in this group, Amendment 51 seeks to limit the defences in Clause 86 to a person who has given written notice to the police or, if not reasonably practical, oral notice. Whilst I understand the motivation behind the amendment, we believe Clause 86 already provides a sufficient and specific statutory defence for individuals who wear or use identity-concealing items for purposes related to health, religious observance or work. Crucially, this defence is subject to a reversed burden of proof. This means the individual must prove on the balance of probabilities that their use of such an item was for one of these legitimate purposes. This mechanism already ensures that only those with genuine reasons can rely on the defence without placing an undue burden on the prosecution. Introducing a requirement to notify the police in writing or orally adds an unnecessary and impractical layer of bureaucracy, risks excluding individuals with legitimate defences simply because they did not or could not provide prior notice, and could result in the criminalisation of innocent people on procedural grounds. The current legal framework strikes an appropriate balance between public safety and individual rights, and Amendment 51 would undermine that balance without offering meaningful enforcement benefits. Turning now to new clause 34, this seeks to import directly into the Public Order Act 1986 the provisions of the Public Order Act 1986, Serious Disruption to the Life of the Community Regulations 2023. And the Shadow Minister has indicated that the rationale for this new clause is to seek to mitigate the effects of the Ziegler judgment from the Supreme Court in June 2021. Now, the Serious Disruption Regulations amended and clarified the meaning of serious disruption to the life of the community for the purposes of the police powers to impose conditions on protests under the Public Order Act 1986. They did so by amending the examples of cases which may constitute serious disruption, specifying that the cumulative impact of protests in the same area and all relevant disruption may be considered by police even when not protest related, when assessing the impact of a particular protest for the purposes of imposing conditions. The Serious Disruption Regulations also define the term community. The example of cases which may constitute serious disruption align to the use of the term within the definition provided in Section 34 of the Public Order Act 2023. The Supreme Court's judgment in the case of Ziegler established that the protection afforded by Articles 10 and 11 of the European Convention on Human Rights to protesters extends to circumstances where the disruption caused by protesters is the intentional obstruction of others. However, the extent of the disruption and whether or not it was intentional are relevant factors in the assessment of proportionality. Taking these subjects in turn, the Shadow Minister will be aware that the Serious Disruption Regulations were successfully challenged by Liberty in May 2024. This government disagreed with the High Court's ruling in this case, particularly in relation to the Court's finding on consultation. Accordingly, we have appealed the Court's decision and await the Court of Appeal's judgment, which I know is expected very shortly. Secondly, the provisions in the Serious Disruption Regulations are not discernibly impacted by the Supreme Court's judgment in the case of Ziegler. The judgment in the Ziegler case relates to the reasonable excuse defence, and more recent case laws such as R and Hallam and others has since made clear the limitations of such a defence. So whilst I recognise the positive intention of new clause 34 to ensure the changes made by the Serious Disruption Regulations remain available to police forces in their policing of protests, we consider that we cannot seek to address the issue, should there be one, until the judgment of the Court of Appeal is received. In short, it would be inappropriate to preempt the Court of Appeal's judgment, and in the meantime, the regulations currently remain in force until the judgment is handed down. Now, it remains open to the Court of Appeal to overturn the High Court's quashing order should the judges find in favour of the government. And we will consider our response to the Court of Appeal's judgment once this is available. So finally, new clause 53 seeks to insert a statutory right to peaceful protest into the Public Order Act 1986, requiring public authorities to respect, protect and facilitate the right to protest. The rights it outlines are already firmly established in UK law through the Human Rights Act, and public authorities must act in a way which is compatible with a convention right. Introducing a parallel provision risks legal duplication, confusion and inconsistent interpretation, potentially complicating the enforcement of public order. Rather than adding legal clarity, the new clause may create uncertainty without offering any new protections. So I hope I've been able to persuade honourable members opposite that their amendments are neither necessary or are premature, and I would ask that the honourable member for Windsor withdraws his Amendment 51.
Jack Rankin.
I don't intend to push my amendment to a vote.
Amendment to be withdrawn. Amendment by leave withdrawn. Clauses 86 to 88 have just been debated. With the leave of the committee, I'll put a single question on those clauses. The question is that clauses 86 to 88 stand part of the bill. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. We now come to the question that clause 89 stand part of the bill. Minister.
In terms of clause 88, formally, because I think it's been dealt with within the...
89, sorry.
Oh, sorry, 89, sorry. Right, clause 89. So this is in relation to the possession of pyrotechnic articles at protests. I think it's fireworks, basically. During recent protests, the police have observed that protesters are increasingly using flares and fireworks. While there is existing legislation prohibiting the use of fireworks in public places and possessing explosives other than for lawful purpose, this does not consistently cover the mere possession of flares and fireworks during protests. Clause 89 therefore creates a new criminal offence of possession of a pyrotechnic article for those taking part in a protest. The misuse of these articles has implications regarding public safety, and this new measure will enable the police to take the necessary preventative action against such behaviour during protests. It is a defence for a person to show that they had a reasonable excuse for having a pyrotechnical article, such as a flare or firework, in their possession at the material time, or in particular to show they had it in their possession for use in connection with work. The offence only applies to those taking part in a protest. This offence does not capture a person that is taking part in, for example, a cultural or religious event where pyrotechnic articles are customarily used. The maximum penalty for this offence will be a level 3 fine of £1,000, and on that basis I commend this clause to the committee.
Take as.
Content.
Okay. Minister.
Well, I'm grateful for the support of the Honourable Member, and on that basis I hope the committee will agree to this new clause being part of the bill.
The question is that clause 89 stand part of the bill. As many of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
If the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. We now come to the question that clause 90 stand part of the bill, with which it will be convenient to also consider Schedule 11. Minister.
Thank you. So this is in relation to war memorials, and I think we all understand and accept that war memorials play a vital role in commemorating those who have made the ultimate sacrifice, including those who have no known grave, and they offer a place of reflection and should be protected. In some recent protests, protesters have climbed on war memorials during those protests, causing anger and outrage from the public. This new offence will provide greater clarity for policing. In particular, this measure makes clear that the act of climbing on specified war memorials is unacceptable and gives police the powers they need to ensure justice is delivered to those engaging in such disrespectful conduct. A war memorial is an object that preserves, as I've said, the memory of a war or conflict and those involved in it. And it can take any form and be created by anyone at any time. It can be permanent or temporary, be a living thing such as a tree or a building, or more traditional way, a plaque, a monument or a sculpture. This offence is intended to ensure that our most significant war memorials are used for their intended purpose of providing a remembrance for those who have died and have no grave to be visited and are not to be disrespected. Schedule 11 to the bill specifies 25 war memorials, such as the Royal Artillery Memorial and the Cenotaph in London, the Portsmouth Naval War Memorial and the Liverpool Cenotaph. Clause 90 includes a power to amend the list of specified war memorials in Schedule 11 by regulation, and the penalty for this offence will be a level 3 fine of up to £1,000 or imprisonment for a term not exceeding 3 months. Now, it is a defence for a person charged with this offence to provide that they had good reason for climbing on the specified war memorial, or if a person has the owner or occupier's consent to climb on it. This is to ensure that activities such as maintenance approved by the owner will not be criminalised. Where a war memorial has a base or steps which are designed for individuals to climb, individuals in that case will not be criminalised either. On that basis, I commend this clause and schedule to the committee.
Clause 90 introduces a new offence specifically targeted at individuals who climb on designated war memorials without lawful justification. The provision is designed to protect sites of national remembrance and ensure they're treated with appropriate respect and dignity. The act of climbing on such memorials, often during protests or large gatherings, can be seen as disrespectful, provocative, or even intentionally inflammatory, particularly when shared on social media. For example, in 2023, a pro-Palestinian demonstration in London, a group of protesters climbed onto the Royal Artillery Memorial at Hyde Park Corner. This memorial honours the tens of thousands of Royal Artillery soldiers who died in World War I. The Metropolitan Police described the actions as inflammatory, but noted that at the time there was no specific law prohibiting climbing on war memorials, so no arrests were made. The introduction of this offence reflects growing public unease about the perceived disrespect towards war memorials during certain protests in recent years. It's right that this measure be put in place to protect the memory and legacy owed to those who made the ultimate sacrifice.
Minister?
I'm very pleased that there's cross-party support for this measure as well.
Question is that clause 90 stand part of the bill. As many of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
The contrary no. I think the ayes have it. Schedule 11 has just been debated. The question is that Schedule 11 be the 11th schedule to the bill. As many of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
If the contrary no, I think the ayes have it. Clause 91 was debated earlier with clause 86. The question is that clause 91 stand part of the bill. As many of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary no, I think the ayes have it. We now come to the question that clause 92 stand part of the bill, with which it will be convenient to also consider Schedule 12. Minister.
Thank you, Mrs Lawbrook. This clause 92 and Schedule 12 relate to the suspension of internet protocol addresses and internet domain names. So clause 92 introduces Schedule 12, which provides for a new power for law enforcement and certain investigative agencies such as the National Crime Agency and HMRC to apply to the courts for an order to suspend internet protocol or IP addresses and domain names when they are being used to facilitate serious crime. All too often, criminals use IP addresses and domain names to facilitate crimes such as fraud, distribution of child sexual abuse material, malware and phishing. Law enforcement agencies do not currently have the legal power to mandate the suspension of IP addresses and domain names. This means in some scenarios the UK public continues to be at risk of falling victim to crime. At present, law enforcement agencies utilise voluntary arrangements with industry to request the suspension of IP addresses and domains. In the majority of domestic cases, voluntary arrangements are successful, and the government is clear that they should continue to be the first port of call in the United Kingdom. However, most organisations responsible for providing the IP addresses or domain names are situated in foreign jurisdictions and often require a formal request, such as a court order, before they will take action. Therefore, this measure will provide for such a court order to be obtained. Domestically, this provision will empower law enforcement agencies to compel the small number of organisations who do not cooperate with voluntary arrangements. This measure will protect the public by giving law enforcement and certain investigative agencies the tools that they need to tackle crimes facilitated by IP addresses and domain names and prevent individuals becoming potential victims. And it will ensure that the UK cyber landscape continues to be one of the safest in the world. And on that basis, I commend this clause to the committee.
Clause 92 rightly provides a legal framework for suspending IP addresses and domain names linked to serious crime. This is a valuable measure in the fight against cyber-enabled criminal activity, including fraud, child exploitation and unlicensed online gambling. By allowing appropriate officers to apply to a judge for suspension orders, the clause ensures that access to digital infrastructure used for criminal purposes can be swiftly and lawfully disrupted. This is particularly effective in cases where traditional enforcement is difficult due to the borderless nature of online platforms. Crucially, safeguards are built in to ensure such powers are only used when necessary and proportionately. The involvement of a judge, strict criteria for suspension and provisions for variation or appeal ensure a fair balance between enforcement and civil liberties.
Grateful for the support.
Question is that clause 92 stand part of the bill. As many of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
The contrary no. I think the ayes have it. Schedule 12 has just been debated. The question is that Schedule 12 being the 12th schedule to the bill. As many of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
If the contrary no, I think the ayes have it. We now come to the question that clause 93 stand part of the bill, with which it will be convenient to also consider clause 94 stand part. Minister.
Thank you, Mrs. Lilbuck. And these clauses are in relation to electronically tracked stolen goods and being able to search without a warrant. So, clause 93 amends the Theft Act 1968 to create a new power for the police to enter premises to search for and seize stolen items which have been electronically tracked to the premises without requiring a warrant from a court where it is not reasonably practical to obtain one. Clause 94 makes the same changes in respect of the service police. Now, under the Safer Streets mission, the government is determined to crack down on acquisitive and street crime, antisocial behaviour and other crimes that make people feel unsafe on our streets. Crimes like phone theft and snatch theft are deeply invasive and can have a profound impact on those who've had their possessions stolen. Tackling mobile phone theft is a priority for this government. According to the Crime Survey for England and Wales, in the year ending March 2024, an estimated 235,000 people had their mobile phones stolen. Around half of stolen phones are taken through snatch theft or pickpocketing, known as theft from the person. The latest crime survey estimates show that street crime, which includes theft from the person offences and personal robbery, increased by 43%, driven by a significant rise in snatch theft. Data published by the Metropolitan Police also shows that theft from the person offences involving a mobile phone increased by 30% in London during the year to January 2025. These figures are extremely concerning. And in recent years, the ability to track valuable items such as phones or bicycles and vehicles has become vastly more sophisticated. If items fitted with GPS or other trackers are stolen, it is now far easier for victims to know where their stolen property is located. However, victims have raised concerns that when they share this information with the police, they are not always able to act. This is extremely frustrating for victims of crime and also for the police. Those committing these offences are not just petty criminals and opportunists. There is really clear evidence of organised criminality and profitability, with stolen devices often being trafficked internationally, particularly to China and Algeria. That is why, at our Mobile Phone Summit on the 6th of February, my Right Honourable friend, the Home Secretary, brought together law enforcement agencies and the mobile phone industry and secured their commitment to work jointly to tackle mobile phone theft and break the business model of the organised criminal networks driving it. Collaborative efforts include significant boosting of data and intelligence sharing to better understand this complex problem, increased police intensification activities, and ensuring all parties work together driving joint solutions. To complement these actions, the legislative reforms we are making with this bill will enable the police to investigate those who conduct mobile phone thefts and other forms of theft more swiftly. Currently, the police have no general power to enter and search premises solely for the purpose of searching for and seizing stolen property without a warrant. We know that where items can be tracked to specific locations, they are quickly moved on or sold, limiting the window in which the police are able to act. Now, this clause strengthens the police's ability to act quickly, and the new power will enable them to maximise the golden hour of investigative opportunity. This can help prevent stolen goods being moved out of the country or used to facilitate other crime, particularly in the case of vehicles and other machinery. The new power is intended to provide a significant deterrent to criminals by increasing the likelihood that they will be caught and punished as a result of swift, decisive action being taken, and reducing the opportunity for thieves to profit from their crimes. The new power will not just be restricted to stolen phones or bags. Rural police forces have shared examples of a £30,000 generator which was tracked to a back garden, and a stolen Range Rover left on farmland, which took considerable police time and effort to retrieve. With this new power, if obtaining a warrant would render the entry and search ineffective, for example, the goods would have been moved on before the police were able to enter, they would have been able to enter property to retrieve the stolen goods immediately. We recognise that powers of entry are by their nature intrusive, and we have built-in safeguards to ensure the new power is used lawfully and proportionately and in specific circumstances. The new power, exercisable by police constables, will therefore require authorisation from an officer of the rank of at least inspector, who must be satisfied that there are reasonable grounds to believe the specific item reported by the victim is on the premises and that it has been stolen. This is not a catch-all power to circumvent the warrant system. It is only intended for use when a victim of theft is able to track the location of a specific stolen item by electronic means, and the police have reasonable grounds to believe the stolen item is on the premises, and it is not reasonably practicable for the police to obtain a warrant. The clause requires at least one stolen item and the premises to be linked by that electronic tracking data. This restricts the circumstances in which the powers can be exercised and provides an additional safeguard against disproportionate use or police accessing properties incorrectly, as it is intended to provide a further layer of reliability. Use of the new power will be subject to the existing safeguards in the Police and Criminal Evidence Act 1984 and its codes of practice. It will only be exercisable by a constable in uniform, and the authorisation to use the power will only last for 24 hours. We will update PACE Code B, which covers police exercise of powers of entry, search and seizure, to reflect the new power and provide further, more detailed guidance to the police around its use. Any use of the new power and items seized under it must be recorded in writing. Now, these clauses are also include a specific seizure power, which is limited to items on the premises reasonably believed to be stolen or evidence of theft offences, which are necessary to seize to prevent damage or disappearance, to prevent the police using the powers to seize items on spurious grounds. Now, these clauses provide a targeted and proportionate extension of police powers to enter and search premises without a warrant. They respond to understandable public concerns about the scale of mobile phone thefts and the effectiveness of the police response. We have ensured that these provisions are subject to appropriate safeguards, and on that basis I commend these clauses to the committee.
Clause 93 is hugely important and rightly allows the police to search premises for electronically tracked stolen goods without a warrant, offering a fast and efficient way for the police to recover stolen items before they are further distributed or sold. with the clause defining the authorisation procedures and limitations on these powers. The clauses empower senior officers at the rank of inspector or above to authorise searches based on reasonable grounds and electronic tracking data. This is particularly useful in cases where obtaining a warrant in time could risk losing crucial evidence or missing the opportunity to seize the stolen goods. It's designed to enable law enforcement to act quickly when there's clear electronic tracking evidence that stolen goods are present on the specified premises. This seems like a common sense measure, allowing law enforcement to act swiftly in recovering electronically tracked stolen goods, making it a highly effective tool in the fight against crime. When stolen items are equipped with tracking devices, the ability to bypass the often time-consuming process of obtaining a warrant can be crucial in preventing further harm, such as the sale or distribution of those goods. This clause ensures that officers can quickly respond to real-time data, reducing the window of opportunity for criminals to move or hide stolen goods. This clause adopts a narrower approach to these powers than those which were being brought forward in the Criminal Justice Bill. I've always been of the view that we should look to empower our police officers and law enforcement agencies wherever possible to further enable them to tackle crime. Can the Minister comment on the rationale for the narrowing of the scope of the powers being given to our police in this measure?
Luke Taylor.
Thank you, Ms. Lord. I'm, as always, a pleasure. Again, broadly back the powers included in this clause. However, I'd like to draw two examples where I've been involved in a case where an item is tracked to an address. However, the tracking accuracy is often not sufficiently accurate to allow the property in which the object appears to be accurately ascertained. I was witness to a neighbour banging on the door of a neighbour's home, demanding that it be let in to retrieve his phone, which he claimed to have been tracked to that address. The police had been called, they weren't able to enter. When the resident came home, it was demonstrated that it wasn't in that address. It was actually 5 doors down, and the individual had dropped the phone walking home. A resident had picked it up, brought it back home, and was looking after it until they could take it to a police station. The individual was incredibly agitated. If the police had been called and the tracking information had shown that it was at a particular address, that inaccurate data would have, under these measures, would have allowed police to enter the property incorrectly. So I think the question there is about ensuring there are appropriate safeguards to the accuracy of the location information that is used. I'd also ask what measures there are in place to compensate where errors are made. The second example was where I had a bike that had been stolen. It had a tracker on it. I followed it to where I thought the tracker was, identified the house where it seemed to be located at, called the police attended, and again, it wasn't in the house, and the bike or the tracker was actually in a van parked at on the street outside. So again, if under these measures entry had been obtained to the property, there would be damage, there would have been incorrect entry to a resident's home, which demonstrates these powers seem like a good idea, and I pick up the comments from the opposition party. What seems as common sense usually omits serious thought in so many occasions. The accuracy of tracking information is not really sufficient, I don't think, to give these powers without that additional step of scrutiny, without that additional step that would ensure that the appropriate measures are being taken. So I'd invite the Minister just to give a bit more reassurance that thought is given to both the accuracy and the mitigations that are in place to compensate residents where these measures are used incorrectly, to ensure that we're not putting residents and citizens at risk of property damage and consequences beyond their control.
Thank you, Chair. And I just wanted to point out the use of electronic devices, in particular mobiles, and I just have to look around this room. We all have our mobiles literally glued to our hand. They do everything for us now. They are a payment gateway, they are there for our emails, they're there for our leisure, they're there to occasionally make phone calls. But these devices are massively important to us now. And we all know the feeling when you leave home without your mobile device, and I think many of us would have to turn around and go and get it because we couldn't live without it. Now, there's been a significant rise of these snatch and grab crimes throughout the country. I know many constituents, friends and colleagues in this place who have been impacted by this crime. Now, for me, it's madness that with the tech in these devices and that they can be tracked, that currently we aren't able to, or the police aren't able to go in and recover them. And I do take the point of my honourable, the honourable member from Sutton and Cheam around the accuracy of tracking. I don't think it's as big an issue as perhaps he makes out, but it's perhaps something for the Minister to consider. So I welcome clause 93. The biggest thing about this is it will act as a deterrent, knowing that the police can enter to recover these items. We need to drive this crime down. It's simply unacceptable, the amount of snatch and grabs that go on in this country at the moment. So I welcome the clause and I'm glad that the government are bringing it forward. Thank you.
To deal with the questions that have been raised in this short debate, first of all, the new measure differs from the previous government's intended reform, as it provides the police with specific targeted powers to retrieve electronically tagged stolen items which have been tracked to premises using the geolocation data and intelligence, and it will equip the police with the tailored powers to act quickly and retrieve items, bringing offenders to justice and swifter resolution for victims. And we are also introducing those robust safeguards with the powers, including the requirement for an officer of at least inspector rank to authorise the use of the powers, so they are used proportionately and lawfully. And I take the issue that the Honourable Gentleman who speaks for the Liberal Democrats has raised very seriously, and about the accuracy of data. And I think, as I tried to set out in my opening remarks, the new powers that are going to be given to the police will need to be satisfied that at least one item of property in question has been electronically tagged to the premises, and that there are reasonable grounds to believe that it's stolen and on the premises before entry is authorised. And I would expect, and we would expect, the police to undertake due diligence and utilise additional information or intelligence to ensure that location is accurate as far as possible. So, and as I've said, any use of that power has to be by at least an inspector. I'm happy to give way.
On that point, and I thank the Minister for giving way, because I think it's a helpful query. Is any differentiation given between last known locations and live tracking? Because obviously tracking devices can be removed, batteries can run out, that sort of thing. That would that be considered sufficient evidence for a current location, or would the information need to be a live location to allow, the proof that it is currently in that position?
And I think the Honourable Gentleman is raising really legitimate questions about how this operationally will work. And as I said in my opening remarks, there will be guidance available to how this is actually going to function, because he does raise genuine questions there. He also raised another question, which was about for householders where perhaps things go wrong and what redress is possible. And what I would say on that point is that there are already existing provisions under which individuals may be able to claim compensation where police have caused damage to property, for example by forcing entry. Any compensation will obviously depend on the circumstances of each case and will be for the police force to determine. And it's unlikely to be paid if that damage was caused by the police acting lawfully on the evidence and information they had available to them. So on that basis, I would commend these clauses to the committee.
The question is that clause 93 stand part of the bill. If any of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. Clause 94 has just been debated. The question is that clause 94 stand part of the bill. If many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. We now come to the question that Clause 95 stand part of the bill. Minister.
Thank you, Mrs Lilbrook. Clause 95, this deals, this grouping, this deals with access to driver licensing information. Clause 95 will facilitate access by the police and other law enforcement officers to DVLA driver information automatically at the point of need for all policing and law enforcement purposes. The police and other law enforcement officers are frequently required to deal with unpredictable circumstances, often operating under significant time pressure as they strive to protect the public, maintain order and investigate complex criminality. The police have provided compelling operational examples where they could better deal with threats and harms faced by individuals if direct access to DVLA driving licence data was provided. Protecting our communities from the threat of sexual violence, stopping drug gangs preying on the vulnerable, safeguarding people from harassment and stalking, and informing relatives of the death or serious injury of a loved one are frequent duties that our police officers undertake. Unfortunately, these are some activities for which police officers cannot make effective use of DVLA driving licence information within the current data access regime. Currently, automatic access to the DVLA driving licence database is limited to enforcing road traffic offences and other Road Traffic Act purposes. This restricts the police's ability to use driver licence records for preventing, detecting and investigating wider types of crime. This clause will build on the existing legislative framework going back 25 years and requires the Secretary of State to make regulations specifying the circumstances in which the police can automatically access the DVLA driving licence database, which may include all policing and law enforcement purposes. Through this clause, we are delivering on our commitment to support the police by providing them with the tools needed to tackle crime and keep the public safe. We are also taking the opportunity to make the legislation more transparent. Instead of the current system, where some law enforcement staff have access to the DVLA driving licence database and others do not, this clause, through new section 71A of the Criminal Justice and Court Services Act 2000, will clearly list all the persons who are permitted to access DVLA driver information. In the process, we are adding a number of bodies that do not currently have access to DVLA data. These are the three bodies responsible for the oversight of police forces in the UK. These being the Independent Office for Police Conduct, England and Wales, the Police Investigations and Review Commission, Scotland, and the Police Ombudsman for Northern Ireland. We've also added the Service Police Complaints Commissioner, which provides oversight for the work of the military police. Finally, we've added the Royal Gibraltar Police and the Gibraltar Defence Police to extend to Gibraltar the same public safety benefits that accrue from Crown dependency forces policing British drivers. New Section 71A collectively defines those permitted to access DVLA driver data as authorised persons, and regulations will set out the process for these individuals to become authorised. We are conscious that police access to personal data needs to be reasonable and proportionate. That is why the clause will bolster the government's arrangements surrounding access to DVLA driving licence data, whilst making the arrangements more straightforward and transparent. The government's framework around the use of the data will be established through regulation and a code of practice. This is to ensure that officers have the best possible advice and guidance on using DVLA driver data appropriately. Chief officers of each organisation will be responsible for ensuring authorised individuals are provided with the appropriate training and oversight for access to this data. We will continue to seek the views of appropriate organisations when drafting the regulations and the code of practice, including those of the Information Commissioner's Office. There are significant existing audit capabilities which will set out which officer access the DVLA driving licence information, so that subsequent checks on the appropriateness of each access can continue. And the clause will also require the publication of an annual report about the use of information made available under this clause. Before I close, I just want to touch on one further point about this clause. Honourable members may have read that the powers conferred by this clause will enable the police and others to access the photographs of driving licence holders for the purposes of facial recognition. Let me set out what the actual position is. Police forces do not conduct facial matching against images contained on the DVLA database, and this clause won't change that. As I said in the second reading debate, facial recognition is an important tool to help the police to identify offenders more quickly and accurately. It is showing significant potential to increase police productivity and effectiveness, and it could substantially contribute to our Safer Streets mission. Now, we need to support the police by ensuring that they have clarity, especially when there is a balance to strike between ensuring public safety and safeguarding the rights of individuals. We will set out our plans to do that later in the year, but as I've said, this clause is not a Trojan horse to facilitate access to driver photographs for facial recognition purposes. In conclusion, I hope we can all agree that this clause provides for a sensible clarification and updating of the legal framework governing law enforcement access to driver licensing information in order to investigate crimes, protect the vulnerable and keep communities safe. And I commend the clause to the committee.
Thank you. Clause 95 updates and expands police and law enforcement access to driver licence data held by the DVLA. It replaces the existing Section 71 of the 2000 Act with a revised framework, adding new Sections 71A to 71C. The modernised provision allows authorised individuals, including the police, service police and other specified law enforcement bodies, to access driver licensing information for a wider range of policing and law enforcement purposes, not just road traffic offences. The Secretary of State is given power to regulate access, impose conditions and consult relevant bodies before issuing new rules or codes of practice. The clause also introduces oversight measures such as a statutory code of practice and an annual report to Parliament, ensuring transparency and responsible data use. I welcome the Minister's comments on the role of facial recognition technology and also on the safeguards that are put in place to ensure the power isn't used disproportionately or inappropriately.
Minister?
I commend the clause to the committee.
The question is that clause 95 stand part of the bill. Many of that opinion say aye. Aye. If the contrary no, I think the ayes have it. We now come to the question that clause 96 stand part of the bill, with which it will be convenient to also consider Schedule 13 and clauses 97 to 100 stand part. Minister.
This debate is around drug testing and has a number of provisions we wish to introduce into the bill. So clauses 96 to 100 and Schedule 13 amend existing legislation to expand the powers of the police to drug test people aged 18 or over on arrest, or if aged 14 or over on charge, where either the offence they have been arrested for or charged with is a trigger offence, or a police officer, at least the rank of inspector, reasonably suspects that their drug use caused or contributed to their offending. These clauses expand the police's powers to drug test in three clear ways: by expanding the range of drugs that can be tested for from specified Class A drugs only to any specified controlled drug, expanding the list of trigger offences which may automatically trigger a drug test, and expanding the power to take an additional sample for drug testing when the first is unsuitable or insufficient, and up to a maximum of 2 samples. The clauses also expand the regime for subsequent assessments for misuse of controlled drugs following a positive test result. Now, drugs, as we all appreciate, can have wide-ranging and devastating impacts on individuals and society. And addressing the drug use that is linked to crime is key to the government's Safer Streets mission. The purpose of drug testing on arrest is to reduce reoffending by referring those whose offending is believed to be, at least in part, caused by their drug use into assessment for treatment and support services. The intention of testing is not to further criminalise drug users, although refusing to provide a sample or attend or stay for an assessment is an offence. Nor does it mean that they will receive treatment instead of a sentence. Drug testing on arrest is a discretionary power subject to the safeguards included in the existing legislation, the PACE codes of practice and other relevant guidance. How it is implemented and funded is of course a local decision made by the Police and Crime Commissioner and service providers. Now, Clause 96 amends the Police and Criminal Evidence Act 1984 to expand the existing police power to drug test in police detention to include any specified controlled drug as opposed to just the specified Class A drugs. The list of controlled drugs will be specified in secondary legislation and will be subject to the negative procedure. To be specified, drugs must be controlled drugs within the meaning of the Misuse of Drugs Act 1971. Clause 96 also inserts new Schedule 2B into PACE, which provides an updated list of trigger offences for drug testing on arrest. A number of the additions to the list of trigger offences are key to the government's Safer Streets mission, including offences linked to violence against women and girls, knife crime and antisocial behaviour. Some existing trigger offences are removed, such as fraud offences and vagrancy offences, where there is no longer a clear link to drug misuse or those offences are being repealed. The clause also moves the Secretary of State's power to amend the list of trigger offences in secondary legislation, subject to the draft affirmative procedure, into PACE. Clause 97 amends the Drugs Act 2005 and the Bail Act 1976 to reflect the expansion from Class A drugs to specified controlled drugs to align with the changes in Clause 96. Clause 98 amends PACE to expand the police's power to take an additional sample from a person in police detention for the purposes of testing, where the first sample is unsuitable or insufficient, up to a maximum of 2 samples. This allows the police to take an additional sample where it is required. For example, where one sample alone is not suitable or sufficient for testing across more than one machine or testing kit or a machine or testing kit to test for additional or different drugs. Only one additional sample may be taken, and only when the first sample was unsuitable or insufficient. The legislative safeguards that apply to the first sample will continue to apply, such as being reminded that refusal to provide a sample is a criminal offence, having a maximum of 2 samples taken during the period of detention, and not being tested before having seen a custody officer. Clause 99 repeals subsection 8A and 8B of section 37 of PACE and amends section 38 of PACE, which currently enable the police to continue to detain an individual for the purpose of taking a sample for drug testing before or after charge. We have determined that due to changes in operational procedure and drug testing technology, this power is no longer necessary, and so we are removing it. Finally, Clause 100 removes the notification conditions in Section 63B of PACE and the Drugs Act 2005. In 2011, Home Office guidance advised all forces in England and Wales that they did not need to seek additional individual authorisation from the Secretary of State to conduct drug testing on arrest. These amendments reflect the guidance by removing the notification condition from both PACE and the Drugs Act 2005. So this removes an administrative burden on the police, improving efficiency, and I commend those clauses.
Clause 96 and Schedule 13 of the Bill significantly expand the existing powers of the police to conduct drug testing on individuals in police detention. Currently, the police can only test for Class A drugs under certain conditions. This clause amends Section 63B and 63C of the Police and Crime Evidence Act 1984 to enable testing for any specified controlled drug, broadening the scope beyond Class A to include Class B and Class C substances. The change allows for testing following arrest for those aged 18 and over, or charge for those aged 14 and over, where the arrest relates to a trigger offence, or where a police inspector reasonably suspects drug misuse contributed to the offence. The clause also inserts new Schedule 2B into PACE to define the list of trigger offences, replacing the outdated Schedule 6 of the Criminal Justice and Court Services Act 2000. This updated schedule retains many existing offences, particularly theft and drug offences, but removes fraud and vagrancy offences. It adds a range of new offences such as common assault, certain violent crime and public order offences. The Secretary of State is given the power to amend the list of drugs and offences through regulations, subject to either the draft affirmative or negative resolution procedures, depending on the nature of the change. Clause 97 makes related changes to the Drugs Act 2005 to align the drug assessment framework with the new expanded testing regime, Sections 9 and 10 of the 2005 Act, which govern the process for initial and follow-up assessments following a positive drugs test, are amended to refer to specific controlled drugs rather than just Class A substances. Clause 98 amends Section 63B of the Police and Criminal Evidence Act 1984 to provide police with the authority to take an additional drug testing sample from a person in police detention. This change supports the broader drug testing powers introduced in clauses 96 and 97, which extended testing beyond Class A to also include specified Class B and C drugs. The new provision allows an additional sample to be taken if the original sample was insufficient or not suitable for the type of analysis required, such as where a different testing method or kit is used to detect other drugs, including synthetic ones. Clause 99 removes police powers under the Police and Criminal Evidence Act that previously allowed continued detention for the purposes of taking a drug testing sample under Section 63B. Specifically, it repeals subsections 37, 8A and 8B, which allow detention before charge for testing, and amends Section 38 to remove the ability to continue detention after charge for the same purpose. These powers are deemed unnecessary due to updates in operational procedures, streamlining the legal framework in line with current police practices. Clause 100 removes the requirement in Section 63B of PACE and the Drugs Act for the Secretary of State to notify the relevant Chief Officer of Police that appropriate arrangements are in place before drug testing or initial and follow-up assessments can be carried out. In practice, since 2011, Home Office guidance has advised police forces that they do not need separate case-by-case authorisation to conduct drug testing in custody. These changes bring the law in line with that guidance by formally removing the notification requirements from both acts. These clauses significantly expand the existing powers of the police to conduct drug testing on individuals in police detention and are the right thing to do, empowering our police forces and making custody suites a safer place for all present. They further reflect a simplification of the administrative process, removing outdated or redundant obligations so as to streamline drug testing procedures in custody.
David Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. I rise in support of Clause 96 of this bill. This clause is a necessary update to the law that reflects the reality facing many of our communities, that drug use, misuse comes in many forms and continues to drive crime, harm and deep personal suffering. Hempstead has had long-standing drug issue that goes back several decades now. Indeed, they were a significant cause of the deaths of two members of my own family, my aunt and my cousin, so I'm particularly motivated to see this clause come into act to help tackle some of the causes of drug crime. And currently, police can only test detainees for Class A drugs. Clause 96 rightly extends that power to all controlled drugs, including Class B and C substances like cannabis or illegally traded prescription drugs. These are not harmless. These contribute to the cycles of reoffending, antisocial behaviour and exploitation, and too often go unnoticed in the system. This clause isn't about punishment, it is about awareness and intervention. Testing can be the first step forward towards treatment. It allows the police to respond more effectively and open the door to support for those struggling with addiction issues. Now, with proper safeguards and parliamentary oversight, these changes give our officers the tools they need whilst protecting people's rights. Communities from major cities to towns like mine will benefit from a smarter and fairer approach. Chair, this is about being honest about the harms that drugs cause, honest about how we help users, and honest about how we prevent the crime drugs cause. I urge members to support this clause.
Thank you, Mrs Lawbrook. Can I just pay tribute to my honourable friend for the speech he's just made and talking about his own personal experience within his family and how devastating drugs can be to families, to individuals, to communities, and why extending the treatments, extending the testing regime within this clause is so important to try and assist and help those people who've got themselves into problems with drugs and are involved in criminality. It's not excusing that at all, but it is finding a way of testing and offering that support and help if people are ready to access treatment. So I commend these clauses to the committee.
The question is that clause 96 stand part of the bill. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. The ayes have it. Schedule 13 has just been debated. The question is that Schedule 13 be the 13th schedule to the bill. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. The ayes have it. Clauses 97 to 100 have also just been debated. With the leave of the committee, I will put a single question on those clauses. Question is that clauses 97 to 100 stand part of the bill. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. We now come to the question that clause 101 stand part of the bill. Minister.
Thank you, Mrs Lilbrook. Clause 101 expands the current criteria for foreign national conditional cautions to encompass foreign nationals with limited leave to enter or remain in the United Kingdom. A foreign national conditional caution requires a foreign national to be removed from the UK as an alternative to prosecution. It will also specify that they may not return within a specified period of time. Presently, foreign nationals may be given a foreign national conditional caution to secure their removal from the UK if they do not have existing leave to enter or remain here. This clause extends this to apply to foreign nationals with limited leave to be here. The clause will extend the pool of persons to whom a foreign national conditional caution may be given with a view to securing the removal from the United Kingdom of more foreign nationals who commit crime. And on that basis, I commend the clause to the committee.
Thank you. This clause expands the definition of a relevant foreign offender in both the Criminal Justice Act 2003 and the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Act 2022 to include individuals who have limited leave to enter or remain in the UK, as defined by the Immigration Act 1971. By doing so, it ensures that people with limited immigration status are treated as relevant foreign offenders for the purposes of issuing conditional or diversionary cautions, enabling these cautions to carry immigration-related consequences, such as potential removal from the UK. Thank you.
I commend the clause to the committee.
Question is that clause 101 stand part of the bill. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. We now come to the question that clause 102 stand part of the bill, with which it will be convenient to also consider schedules 14 and 15 and clause 103 stand part. Minister.
Thank you, Mrs Lilbrook. Clause 102 introduces schedules 14 and 15 to the bill, which make the most significant reforms to the confiscation regime in England and Wales and Northern Ireland, as contained in the Proceeds of Crime Act 2002, or POCA, since the Act was passed over 20 years ago. The confiscation regime allows courts to place confiscation orders on defendants in order to repay the benefit gained from criminality and make clear to offenders that crime does not pay. The government has been aware that confiscation has been in need of reform for some time. In 2018, the Home Office commissioned the Law Commission of England and Wales to review the confiscation regime and make recommendations for reform. The Law Commission's final report was published in November 2022 and contains 119 recommendations which have shaped the measures we are introducing in this bill. Reform is necessary to improve enforcement of confiscation orders and streamline processes by law enforcement and court services so that the regime operates as efficiently and effectively as possible. Reform will be achieved by rationalising court processes, creating streamlined confiscation orders, expediting the enforcement of unpaid orders and returning more funds to victims. In particular, this bill contains a new measure to return funds to victims following an uplift of the amount that is to be paid towards a confiscation order. If a confiscation order is uplifted, money can be redirected towards existing victims to compensate for their outstanding losses. The Home Office has consulted extensively.
Order, order. It's 11:25 a.m. The committee is now adjourned until 2 p.m.